So we understand now what we're attempting to do. Saussure is attempting to create a science that analyzes this, not only the language, but this circuit, right? And the two facets of this circuit. The active facet and the passive facet. The executive facet, the fact that I can dictate, and the passive receptive facet, the fact that I can listen, I can hearken, I can follow commands, if you will. And this very simple concept is the foundation for some seminal research. Stanley Milgram's obedience to authority research is based on not necessarily this specific concept, but it's rooted in this sort of semiological distinction between executive and receptive aspects, right? Since I am a person who society has said is deemed worthy to talk on topics like semiology, because I'm a professor, people take what I say with more seriousness than they did when I was just a grad student. The interesting thing is as a grad student I was talking the same way, but nobody wanted to listen to me. So unfortunately I've recognized that, and for all you graduate students, what you need to recognize is that the linguistic community has said that the arbitrary acceptance and achievement of your PhD degree is merit for you to talk sensibly. We know that's false. But people will listen to you once you get your degree. Before you get your degree, nobody wants to hear you. After you get your degree, everybody was going to hear what you're going to say. So use it to your advantage. I'm joking, of course. Okay, next quote in Saussure. Linguistics will thus be assigned, right? Now that we recognize what it is that we're going to do, and we recognize the function, the sort of fundamental function of transferring concepts from one individual to other, as is evident in the square inside the circle example, linguistics will thus be assigned to a clearly defined place in the field of human knowledge, right? And this is from Saussure specifically. It will be defined within, right, in the field of human knowledge. And I gotta, I don't want to overstep bounds here. I have a problem with interpretations of semiotics that attempt to say that semiotics and semiology is a refutation of epistemology. I don't think that that's right. I can see why that might be the case, but I don't think that that's right. I would make the claim, based on what Saussure has said, and stuff that I know that I'm not presenting on here, what Peirce has said, and so on, that technically speaking, it could be argued, I know the linguists would hate the argument, but it could be argued that semiotics is actually a branch of epistemology, right? It's a facet of epistemology. Epistemology is concerned with the structures of human understanding, the structures of knowledge. Saussure himself says, it is therefore, linguistics will thus be assigned to a clearly defined place in the field of human knowledge, right? And with respect to human knowledge, epistemology does that, right? So there are many, many different branches of epistemology, but there's no surprise, there's a direct correlation between sort of my interests as a philosopher / epistemologist. I was trained as an epistemologist. I practice my day-to-day 9 to 5 as a conflict resolutionist, but I use epistemology and philosophy for everything that I do. I interpret the world via this stuff. It's important to recognize that with respect to semiology, with respect to a discourse on a recognition on the meaning of signs, a meaning of symbols, that there is a sense in which we have to situate at all times that discourse in our capacity to understand. I can't, and this is why I do anthropos semiotics, right? I don't do any other type of semiotics myself. Not to, there's architectural semiotics, right? You can talk about sort of the semiotics of buildings, right? In a pre-scientific Enlightenment era, the biggest building in the city was the cathedral. And it was a reason that it was the biggest building, because it was a reflection of the eminent power of God via the church. Now, the biggest building in the city is definitely not the cathedral, it's the business bank, it's the banking center. And why is it the banking center? Because now semiotics, architectural semiotics says that the biggest building is a sign of affluence, it's a sign of power, right? so there's that. Me as an epistemologist, as a philosopher, I'm interested in humans. I'm interested in our ability to think. So for me, what's important is a recognition, and it doesn't have to be subordinate, right? It doesn't have to be subordinate, but it has to be a recognition that you can't properly talk about anthroposemiotics, that's a particular branch of semiotics. You can't talk properly about anthroposemiotics without recognizing that your discourse is going to be wedded to epistemology. So the idea that semiotics refutes is a refutation of epistemology, I'm not really buying it. Okay. Furthermore, it's important to recognize within a Saussurean sense what's at stake here, right? And this is where we really begin to get to the nitty-gritty. So, you guys want abyss? We're gonna walk towards it. We're not gonna peer in it yet, but we're gonna walk towards it. Some, according to Saussure, have falsely understood the nature of semiotics, the nature of language. Some falsely view language as reducible to nomenclature, right? So this is false. Some view language as reducible some view it as reducible to nomenclature, right? Sort of very, what's the word? Very tacit, and even tacit is too strong, if that makes any sense. The very tacit relationship between what I am saying and what there is. In epistemology, we call this a correspondence theory of epistemology, right? So in epistemology, this is why, again, it's not a refutation, but it sort of coincides with epistemological critiques. In epistemology, we had this idea of a correspondence theory of truth, that I have an idea of a tree in my mind, and I verify and validate that idea with a tree in the world, right? But this becomes problematic for many reasons, of which I'm not going to discuss now. Later, when we talk about Lacan returns to this idea and he goes crazy with it, and he gives a great account. The way that he writes is cryptic as hell, but it's, once you get past the language, and I can't imagine what it was like in the original text, but at least the translation is cryptic. Lacan looks at this sort of in an epistemological sense, this correspondence theory of truth, and says this is ridiculous because there are other ways of interpreting these signs, right? So tree is represented by the word tree. Man or woman is represented by man/woman. And then car, I drew my awesome car on 20s. Bam, 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 bam. Is represented by car. Like, this is a very, there's allegedly this correspondence, if you will, between the stuff that I have in my head, the images and the words in the world, or the stuff that I had in my head and the stuff in the reality, the tree in reality, the car in reality, the woman, the man. Right? This correspondence is fundamentally flawed. I don't know if there's there's a revised version of correspondence theory of truth, but I'm not going to get into that now. But the original articulation of this correspondence in epistemology and sort of this very sort of primitive nomenclature of word means that, this ostensibly defined sort of by tree, I mean that, you can't really create a science on that. You can't. There's no way to create a science on that, because when I say tree, I don't mean that tree, because I would have to use that tree as a representative of every single. I would have to go by and say tree, 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 tree. It's too simple. This account is exceedingly too simple. So what Saussure does is he's going to reject this, and I'm going to show you now the problems that arise from this attempt to reduce language to mere nomenclature, right? And there's an epistemological version, which I'm not going to get into, and it's the critique of the correspondence theory of truth. Those of you graduate students, philosophy graduate students that are following along, if you want to look at the refutation of the correspondence theory of truth, it's along the same lines of Saussure's sort of rejection of the reducibility of language to nomenclature. That was technical, but hopefully you understood that.